If you've ever moved, even a tiny little move, let's say from one apartment to another in the same city or even just down the street, you know the exhaustion that comes from just thinking of packing. You have to pack clothes, awkward pots and pans, maybe some heavy books, not to mention your ever-growing collection of artwork and breakable pottery that you've been gradually buying over time from fellow makers you admire, right? But then, don't forget the hundreds of pounds of clay, glazes with cryptic handwritten labels, tools of all shapes and sizes. Oh, and of course, that kiln that requires specialized electrical setup and ventilation. For most of us potters, our entire practice is built around the assumption of permanence, not mobility. I mean, we quite literally have clay as part of the foundation of buildings, cementing us into our spaces, our routines, and perhaps our understanding of what a ceramic practice looks like. So what happens when a maker rejects that assumption of the need for permanence? What does it mean to build a life in clay that spans continents, studios, communities, and of course, materials? Constantly starting over, but somehow still moving forward. What wisdom might be found in embracing impermanence in one of the most permanent of mediums? Today's conversation with Eva Champagne explores exactly this tension. As a multidisciplinary artist who's created pottery anywhere from Florida to the Virgin Islands, as far as Bali, and now back in Montana, Eva has built a creative practice that defies the conventional wisdom about what it takes to develop as a ceramic artist, turning what many would consider a liability into one of her greatest creative strengths. We get into many fascinating aspects of this nomadic making life, from the practical challenges of restarting in each location to the deep relationships formed in ceramic communities around the world. Plus, of course, the real talk of what isn't so fabulous about what can definitely look like a truly fabulous lifestyle. Eva's story reminds us that perhaps our assumptions about what's essential for creative work might be more flexible than we think. Maybe the real magic happens not despite constant change, but because of it. You'll just have to listen to find out, and we're going to get right into it right after a brief word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by The Community. With now over 100 makers from all over the world, The Community is where you can dive deeper into any topics we started talking about here on the podcast. Whether it's the debate back on episode 509 about choosing between Etsy or your own website, or trying to sort out what type of side hustle or full-time business works for your own personal life after hearing so many different stories here on the podcast. If you've been listening along and finding yourself wishing for more at the end of an episode, The Community is that more. Learn about more of the perks of membership by visiting makersplaybook.com/community. Or send me a message and I can put you in touch with one of our members to get an insider's perspective. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Hey, Eva, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I completely overthought name pronunciation now that we've just talked about that for 5 minutes. I was like, oh no, wait, which one?
3 letters. Oh.
You know, you put an A or an E in anything and it just... And now when I say the letter E, I'm like, is it the English E or is it the Italian E, which is technically the English I? Like, there's so many options.
Yeah, it's cool. I appreciate you asking.
Totally. Well, you were introduced to me by our community member, Rhiannon. And so I'm going to let you introduce yourself here first. Take it away because I've just kind of been internet stalking you since Rhiannon mentioned your work.
Okay. Well, as we mentioned earlier, my name is Eva, and I'm a maker. I don't actually consider myself a potter, though I make pots. I make a lot of things in painting, drawing, jewelry, ceramics of all kinds. And also, I think another big part of who I am is that I love to teach and share that. And that's probably the best that I can do as far as my introduction.
I think that's a really interesting distinction. And I see, this is why I love an open ended question in the beginning because I didn't expect that at all. And now I'm like, oh, I want to know more about that. Because have you just always been interested in multiple mediums? And that's why a specific, something that's specific to a one medium doesn't land as well for you? Or just, I'm just
Yes.
curious now.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, because I actually started out as a drawing and painting person, mostly figurative or, I was sort of a plein air painter when I was younger, taught in a post impressionist style, in fact. And I kind of backed my way into a ceramics class without true interest in the medium because I couldn't get any other classes. And, it changed my life. And yet I never stopped painting or drawing. It's kind of a hybrid painting, drawing. I'm not sure exactly which it is that I'm doing. I feel like I'm doing both. And so over time, I discovered, once I sort of felt comfortable with the medium of clay and started to feel that I could communicate or, I felt a certain amount of fluency with it, there was something missing that I was constantly trying to discover how to express through clay. It started off with just doing paintings on slabs, using underglaze and slips. And that was in like early on. But meanwhile, I was still doing painting and drawing classes. So we're talking about still school time. And yet there was something about the painting and drawing that was dry or lacking in kind of that juiciness of ceramics as well. And I constantly was keeping them sort of separate. And it was about, I don't remember how many years ago that I made a conscious effort to try to bring them together because I felt I was only ever doing about maybe 3/4 of what I felt could be done in each medium for myself, for my own journey, And I still do them both, but I feel that I'm really becoming much better at experimenting and expressing in a painterly way through ceramic materials. And certainly the way that I paint has become a lot the way I glaze and decorate surfaces. I tend to be now much more of a layerer in painting than I was prior because of the way that we work with clay.
That's actually, ironically, I don't know. I feel like I use that phrase like Alanis Morissette, so we're just going to go with it. It's a conversation we have, Francesco and I, a lot because, and there's not a right or a wrong here. It's just something we notice. A lot of people who use clay as a canvas, right? They're clearly have a skill or a training or whatever in painting, and they're painting on the clay. And that in and of itself is a whole other skill in terms of around a curved form or a three-dimensional form. There's a question that comes up for us of like, well, why ceramic then? Right? The way you're talking about it, that then starts to come together for me, as opposed to sometimes you see something that's beautifully painted, that's beautifully done, but it is like, okay, well, it's painted on, like, did it have to be ceramic? Why is it ceramic? Like, what's that connection to the medium? And so now the way you're describing it is the first time I'm like, oh, yes, that intention is there. These things come together and that creates something almost like a third medium or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really a question there. It's just where my brain went.
Okay, if I can pick that up, I might say, because I ask myself the same thing. Why? For me, I love to make mugs. Like, I, I'm like bananas about making mugs and cups. And I'll tell you why ceramic and why I put so much work into these really simple forms. And part of it is I want to get the work in someone's hands and I want them to have an experience of turning it around and trying to unravel the story of the surface. Cups and mugs for me, of course, they're way more challenging than most people think, to make. the old intimate object trope.
Amen to that.
They're on a small scale that I can work through an idea through a series. And when I'm drawing, I often do the same thing. I'll have 4 pieces of paper out at the same time, and I work in a progression. I learned that from ceramics. I learned that from working in clay, but I found that each one, you do a small tweak, and now you have a series of 4 different iterations of an idea, or watching an idea progress from 1 to 3 to 4. And they can exist as a set or they can exist independently, sort of just depending on how I feel or however the viewer feels. But with ceramics, you have this opportunity of permanence and you have an opportunity to embed the work into somebody's life in a way that it is, and we all talk about this as makers, I think, that in a way that can be contemplated in the quiet moments of life. It's not sitting off on a wall that you walk by and look at. It's something that you sit and you rest it in your hand, you bring it to your face. It's a very different relationship. And I can't get enough of that. And so even though I love making things at different scales, or especially I love making big things or even sculptural things, I'll always, always come back to the cup or the mug. And part of that is I love a composition in the round. We talk about that as a change, right? But when I try to work in a picture plane, in a square, in a flat picture plane in ceramics, it's much more difficult for me than when I'm looking in the round and I love the way the composition comes back and meets itself. I just find magic in that. That's my long answer.
No, it's a fantastic answer. I'm going to make him listen to this episode. Well, because it's also, for me, so much more difficult, right? Like when I do see these incredible painterly skills on a three-dimensional object, to think of it in the round, to make that beginning connect to the end so that it's never ending, takes another level of thinking through the design of something as compared to start and finish, stop, and okay, I'll put the handle in between because then that gives me a breaking point or something.
Right. Which it does sometimes, sometimes that is like the resting point, but it's endlessly fascinating. I find it endlessly challenging to find different ways to divide up the space if it's going to come back around and meet itself. Because I don't tend to make things that are like a series where everything's identical, where if I find a good design and then I make, however many of those, there's always something different. There may be even possibly a dozen of one series, but none of them will be the same because I'm always just pushing a little tiny bit on each one so that, many options have been kind of collapsed within one sort of design. And if you're not entertained, why are we, granted, we all have to make a living, but for me, it's about the curiosity and discovery and all of that. Otherwise, I couldn't do it, And then add soda. Add soda. And then
Right, and then make it goopy.
I'll never ever tire. I'll never get bored. I'll never answer every question. None of us will. Until we decide, oh, I've answered every question that I have and I'm satisfied and now I'm going to go do something different.
And I think that's also the thing with ceramics, at least, and I'm going down a totally different rabbit hole, but at least with chatting with mentors who are, significantly more advanced in their career, it seems like part of the reason potters never retire isn't purely a financial decision, but is also just like a constant, there's still more to figure out. There's still more to learn. There's still more to do and explore and push farther.
Right. And I think that would be the case for anything anyone is very passionate about. And everyone has a different threshold, though. I think sometimes, and I respect that all day long, if someone goes, you know what, this is the end of my curiosity in this realm. And I think that must be a really exciting and potentially scary place to come to. I can't imagine it ever for myself, for making things. But what a cool thing to think, too, is that you've taken a road as far as it is interesting. And now what's next? Become a chef or something.
I can kind of connect with that a little bit, actually, because I think that's sort of where I hit with photography, commercially at least, because for the first decade, it was all about increasing the skills, among other things. But for me, internally, personally, I was still pushing to become better. Not to say I would qualify myself as a master photographer. However, at a certain point, I knew that I could walk into any room and create the kind of lighting I wanted to create. do what I wanted to do instead of having that kind of nervous, excited, like come into the room and be like, okay, I've got 5 minutes. I've got to figure this out. Ooh, let me try this. Let me try this. I'm not certain. Now I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I got 5 minutes. Put the light there. I'm good. We're set. Let's go.
Yeah.
It was wonderful when I got to that point because there was a level of proficiency and confidence, which is a nice change from nervous anxiety. I could have chosen a next step. I'm sure I could have chosen to push it further. There's people who have that passion in that particular craft. But for me, I didn't get into it for that. I got into it for people. And so, to no one's surprise, hence why I love having conversations that get recorded now.
Right. That's so cool, though. Yeah. So you did come to a point where you were like, "Oh, this is feeling really different than it used to." So when you discovered that, did you shift to, "I'm gonna start something completely brand new," or did you sort of, tweak your direction to add that, like, discovery back in, that little edge of, or did you not miss the nervousness of not knowing?
Oh, I didn't miss it. No. When you've got 50 to 100 catering staff moving around you and a planner who's like, "Are you done yet? Are you ready? Can I open the room?" Not having the nervousness was very lovely.
Good point.
To be like, "Yep, I'm good. I got it. We're set." Because there's always something else
Right.
going on that can keep the energy going. I do realize in saying it out loud, it's the first connection of that people relationship side, right? Of realizing the reason this shift into the podcast it's always felt natural to me, even though it's been surprising to other people, that I think there's something there in terms of that relationship building and that storytelling.
Right.
It's just a different medium.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
I'm going to have to sit with that more. But nobody wants more of my story. We want more of your story.
No.
Eva's like, great, let's keep talking about you. So you mentioned class. Was painting and drawing like undergrad? Like you always knew you wanted to be making and creative and then pottery came later? Or tell us a little bit about kind of the early days.
Yeah, well, super early days, meaning right out of high school, I went directly to an art school. And it was nowadays it's a very commercial art school, but back then they had a very good fine arts department, and it was called the Academy of Art in San Francisco. They make you go through this foundations program. So it was quite rigorous, really. And it was very kind of, classical. And I was like the youngest one there because most of the people going to art school have been around the block a little bit and they've made a conscious choice to kind of come back to it. And I was just this goofy kid out of high school. When I took the first figure drawing class is when everything blew up for me. And the figure has been my medium for so long and my inspiration, and love painting portraits. And and even in grad school, I taught figure drawing. I've taught figure drawing at colleges. To me, that's sort of a thing I don't get enough of. And probably for me, that is one of the things I'm so passionate about that I don't pursue now. And it's partly because of the incredible quality of attention one has to give to a human being in a way that's almost like a devotion. And I'm sorry if that sounds very romantic or woo woo, but I was taught by incredible teachers to really hone my quality of observation and my hand and eye coordination. So the combination of the discipline of that and the feeling of looking at a portrait or a figure and that pathos that emerges from a well done one. It doesn't have to be the most accurate or precise, but if it's bringing up some kind of a sense of the humanity of somebody, that's like a charge that I really loved, and I love to share it. So I always did love teaching it too, but it's takes discipline and it takes a lot of focus, and so it's not an easy thing to necessarily teach. But anyway, so yeah, I started out in 2D and, classical like 2D design and lots of figure drawing classes. And then when I transferred, ultimately I ended up going up to Humboldt State in California partly for their ceramics, because I did a little side trip for a couple semesters to San Francisco State, which is where I started ceramics sort of by accident because I couldn't get anything else. and moved up to Humboldt because I'd caught the bug and they had a good ceramics department. But they also had a marvelous painting department. And my painting, where he was actually drawing, my figure drawing teacher was like kind of became like an uncle to me, sort of. 'Cause my family was away in Hong Kong. And so I didn't see family very much or have anybody, any sort of family influence. This is long before cell phones and everything. And so I really dove in head first, but I was split about 50-50 between drawing, and it definitely wasn't painting. I didn't get into painting, but it was like drawing media and ceramics.
I'm having one of those moments where, like I said at the beginning, Rhiannon's knows you and your work. And so that was within the community, people request who I chat to here. And so just kind of trusted her recommendation and you and I connected. But it's just having one of those moments of like the way you talked about observing a human for figure drawing and the figure and capturing their essence and their ethos is exactly what got me hooked with photography, with photographing people. It's just one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is getting a little like, woohoo, like some things we were supposed to have this conversation clearly. Cause I was like, oh, fascinating. Cause that's how, I remember for me having this project in university as well about, I took portraits of my grandparents and it was the first time I ever saw a picture of them that was their personality and not, they're of the generation too where the smile in photos was always awkward. Grandma's
Mm,
eyes were closed half the time, or somebody's mouth was open because they were talking. And so I took these portraits that was, laughing and cracking jokes and stuff. I was like, oh, this is the magic sauce, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it was cropped badly or whatever. It was just that was to be able to feel that person through a
mhm.
two-dimensional medium was something kind of, frozen in time. And of course, people age, people pass away. So then to be able to look back at that is something really special. So, yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely more than just a photograph or a drawing of that person. It is absolutely about the maker, the photographer, and the person drawing. Absolutely. There's a really interesting and ineffable kind of alchemy to that, for sure, to both, anything, photography.
And to your point, a matter of the amount of energy it takes. That was the thing that it wasn't until 2020 where we were all forced to pause that I finally recognized just how much of yourself you have to give to get that person on the other side of whatever medium to feel comfortable enough for you to capture that ethos. You have to give so much to provide them that comfort that like it wasn't until that great universal pause for us all that I was like, oh, I'm exhausted.
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
But anyways, I digress. So kind of the classical training route, if you will, but for you with university and finding pottery, was there like a route that you saw people taking with it to kind of create a life from this? Because I think what's really interesting about your story, at least from the outside looking in, is how international you've done this. And pottery is not the medium I think of as being moving countries friendly.
Oh, this is like the unanswerable thing because no, it has not been at all convenient, but it has made me extremely adaptable and very, perhaps you could say, light on my feet and very, very comfortable with discovering what's new in a place and jumping in. There was a time in 99, I decided to move to the Virgin Islands and I was quitting clay because it was just too hard to do. I had 2 jobs, and I was trying to paint at home, and I had a ceramic studio in Berkeley, and I was like, I can't give anything my full focus, but I can paint and draw anywhere in the world with very little. So I'm like, I'm moving to the Caribbean, and I'm just gonna be a painter, and the first person I meet is a potter on the island. So now it's like, "Oh, this is what she does, this is what I'm gonna learn here," and in the end, I didn't really do a whole lot of ceramics there, but that's kind of a good illustration of I have tried to give it up. I have tried to quit her, and I just can't quit her. And it's a really sort of convoluted story of how I ended up all over the world, but I've traveled before. I will take any opportunity to travel. Growing up overseas brought me a lot of opportunities to see places that I wouldn't have had I grown up in the States. And my father traveled a ton, like he was hardly ever home. And it really instilled, and my mother moved overseas, like, there was one point where my brother was going to boarding school in the States, I was in Hong Kong, dad was who knows where, my mother was, like, in London working, and I was at home by myself going to school, you know, and that was totally normal, and so I think that looking back, I realized what I wanted was I wanted my creativity or my whatever gifts that I had once I, quit waitressing and was like, I'm doing this thing to help me to see the world and meet people and share this exciting thing. And so I've always privileged experience over stability, and whether that's stability of location or finances, quite honestly. You wouldn't just believe some of the shoestring ways I've thrown some of this stuff together. It is not that I am just making bank on, I've just got this thriving pottery business somehow, even though I've almost never had my own studio. I cobble things together, and that's as much a creative act as anything else, to be honest, you know?
Well, that's even just with the last move, I was thinking through like the amount of time to be without a working space is also a huge factor for potters and for being able to survive as an independent person, as an adult, as all of the things, but also, it's not an easy medium to reset. Even if we were chatting and all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, if a family is independently wealthy, yes, I understand how you can move about the world, but you would still take so many resources to reset a studio, to find new clay, to experiment with it and test it and the glaze research. Oh my gosh. But we're not, that was a hypothetical. I will clarify for everybody, not independently wealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, and I'll be very honest, having just unloaded my first glaze firing since coming back, and it's all new stuff that I'm working with. I live almost 2 hours from the kiln, and I have, obnoxious animals that can't get along, and so just even getting a and then firing a kiln is at least overnight. So to get away anyway, long story short, I didn't get a glaze firing done until this weekend, and since I wasn't able to test and it was all new stuff and all the glazes, I didn't wanna use the same glazes I used 6 years ago, but given I don't have a space or the time to test a new palette, which I have in my brain, but I have to make those glazes, I just thought, "Well, I'll just go back to what I used before, but I'm a different person, it's a different clay, we'll make something exciting from it." And it has been exciting. The process has been exciting. However, almost all my glazes had to be reformulated because of materials now being scarce. Almost none of them, 2 of them were okay. Almost none of them behaved the way that I remembered them behaving. But also my clay was different, and I knew that it had its own personalities. But the whole reason I started in on that is that, yes, you gotta start over every time. And I don't have my own kiln, and so that's why, again, have to be so adaptable, and it's just lucky that I'm really curious and that I'm really interested in the experience of discovery, and that I live on very, very little as a person, and so I would really love someday, it is my absolute vision for myself to have a stability, a home, a studio, my own darn kiln for once, and imagine what it might look like to have a space of time ahead of me that is, doesn't have a deadline or, isn't temporary, where I have just that stability and time to pursue all these ideas because honestly, there's not an idea that I have seen to a point that I'm satisfied yet. And I'm sure a lot of us can say that, right? Because we're endlessly curious as creative people. But to shift gears constantly, yeah, it's exciting, but I'm tired, to be quite honest. I want to just sort of settle in for this long haul of the luxury of time and space to follow an idea to its natural kind of, conclusion or its natural transition to a new idea, not constantly squeezing it in and thinking, but will this fit in my car? Or, I have to leave it behind because I'm flying. It's been a very different, I think it's not what I anticipated I'd still be doing at my age. But on the other hand, it's been very interesting.
Mm. Well, before I get ahead of myself, because I have so many questions from all of that. Let me just track back. Just how many countries are we talking about? So we moved to the Virgin Islands. How long were you there?
About 5 years,
Okay.
and
And then
then I moved to Florida, and I did a postbac at University of Florida, and I stayed on for 2 years. The idea being that, okay, I'm gonna give this thing a go, and I'm gonna go to grad school, but I had no portfolio, and I'd been literally living on an island for 5 years, not even seeing ceramics magazines or anything, so I had no clue what was going on in the world, of just literally living on an island. And so University of Florida was an amazing postbac program for not just me, but boy, did it really jump started me, and it taught me so much about the community aspect of ceramics. And God, I just learned so much in that program. And then I did go to graduate school. I came up here to Montana and I went to UM in Missoula. And that was a 3-year program. And because I finished in the spring of 2009, and that was a difficult year to be interviewing for jobs because of yeah. So I did get some interviews, but nothing panned out. And so then I decided, like, I had to keep busy. And even though I was broke, I just applied for residencies. And so the first residency I got was at Valoris in France. Not a cheap one, but I was like, yeah, I'm going to get
but
back to.
doesn't suck.
No, it doesn't suck. I love the south of France. I'd been there quite a bit when I was younger. That's where I studied painting initially, was in Provence. And so I was just delighted, but it was like literally 5 minutes after my grad thesis was taken down. I like went and we're like, "Yeah, okay, 5 weeks and we have another show." When that was done, I went up to Alaska for a few months to try to earn back some of that money that, that travel.
That's the south of France will take.
Yeah. And then from there, I did a residency at Red Lodge. I did a year at Red Lodge Clay Center, which again was just amazing. Just amazing. I learned a lot. It was really a great opportunity to learn a lot of different aspects and also to meet other makers. Like, we worked in the gallery and we had to teach classes and things like that. But having the short term residents come and go started some really interesting and delightful friendships and learning experiences. And then from there, I went to the clay studio of Missoula. But in the midst of that residency, I went to Denmark, to Gulliago, and did another quick thing there. I did go to Alaska a couple summers after that, too, to just sort of check out and make a ton of money. It was never quite a ton, to be honest, but
I'm picturing fishing. I'm picturing you on a boat.
I was actually at a remote fishing and hunting lodge on an island off of Kodiak. So I was really the cook and cleaning up, just sort of doing the domestic and all the cooking. And it was like
Seasonal.
solid 7 days a week, May to September, whatever. And then I did a lot of, what do you call it? Adjunct teaching, mostly in Florida at a couple of different colleges there. And that's where I was when I finally got accepted to the residency in Bali, which is what brought me there the first time. That's not all the travel, but that's all the clay related. At Bali, I thought was going to sort of be, I'll definitely see a lot of Asia while I'm here and all of that. But no, I was far too busy working. And then COVID happened. But I was able during so I would have a month off, and that was the only time I could sort of get any extracurriculars in. So one year I did go to Scotland and I taught some workshops there, and I was able to take a week at one point and go, or 2 weeks maybe, and go to Sydney and teach a workshop and meet ceramists there. So that's the biggest charge, is just like what a great global community we have. And I think clay and any kind of process art form where everybody gets big into process is just so easy to get to know people and to get excited and have fun, because we always have that thing to talk about and share. And there's plenty of differences, but lots and lots of commonality.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
marvel.
the most recent, you were in Bali for 6 years, right? So that's just right before COVID.
Yeah, I moved there in like June 2019. And I had been for my residency in 2013, and then I had returned twice and taught workshops. So by the time I moved there, I already knew the staff at at the studio, and I really, really, really had a lot of respect. I still do, of course. I have a lot of respect for that studio and everybody involved in it. And I just was so delighted to become a part of that.
Which, for everybody listening, going like, wait a second, I can go to Bali and study clay. We're talking about the Gaia Studio. I'll put a link
Yeah.
in the show notes.
Yeah, Gaia Ceramic Arts Center. It's amazing.
Yep. I was like, I can just see the like eyeballs being like, what?
That's how I was when I found out about it. Like, it was a total accident. I was like, "What? There's a place in Bali?" And I like, literally, the moment I found out about it, I was, like, Googling. Like yeah, yeah.
Which is so funny, right? Because everything is relative. Like, I feel like for those of us in the States, Bali is like this exotic, far off, magical place. And then I worked with a nonprofit for some photo documentary stuff that works in Fiji. So I had the chance to go to Fiji, which I put in the same category as Bali in terms of
Yeah,
far
I
off
know.
place, crossing the international date line. And it was so funny because while we were there, it was spring break for Australians. Because
Oh,
Fiji is to Sydney what it like Cancun is to United States undergrads. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, obviously it's like a 2-hour flight, no big deal for them, where we're here because it's this like far off place. It's just, it's just funny. I don't know. That's random.
well, it's I know what you mean.
So 6 years was really the longest time in any one place.
5.5 is the longest time in any one place. I mean, Montana, I've been here much longer, but I would sort of zip away and go teach somewhere and come back, but Montana remained my home base, but I wasn't here the entire time either, you know? Yeah, I don't have a hometown or anything, so it's not as though like, when that's why when I came back from Bali, it was like, well, of course I'll go to Montana, I love it here, but it's not because I have family or any hometown whatsoever in the States or anywhere anymore.
That's super interesting. I was wondering, that was one of the questions I was wondering in terms of like, I understood from a clay standpoint why like, I knew Gaia, I understood that. And then when I saw you go to Montana, I was like, okay, for clay, that makes sense. But also in my brain, I was like, wow, to go from Bali to Montana and also in winter, just for the
Yeah.
record, for everybody, I was like, that's an aggressive closet shift. Like, you're going to need other clothes.
Well, couple things about it. I didn't really intend to come back so late in the year, but with one thing and another, it just made sense for a lot of people's schedules if I did wait until that point. And I had family reasons for wanting to come back and other things. So it wasn't I wouldn't choose it to come back in the middle of winter and certainly not introduce two tropical, a Bali dog and a Bali cat. Hi, welcome to high altitude and freezing cold months for the next half year. That was, not easy for them, I don't think. But part of it is one, I have friends here, and two, I love it. I love Montana so much, and it feels more like home, I think, than anywhere I can think of at the moment. And two, I had left my car here, so I had a vehicle. And I had my stuff in a shipping container storage unit, so I have not had to buy any new winter clothes. I'm wearing all the same winter clothes from 6 years ago.
I don't know that any of my clothes would fit me from 6 years ago, so congratulations.
I've been living in a log cabin for these months. No one's seeing exactly how everything fits, but, so while it does sound really impractical, in some ways it just made the most practical sense just to come back here. And also, if you're gonna leave a place like Bali, I just wanted to land where I'd feel at home, even though I didn't have something lined up or anything. Just
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for anybody who has never lived abroad for any given amount of time, and my longest period of time abroad was a year in England, so it's not even like as huge of a culture shock as what you're talking about. But I think what many people might underestimate or might not even be aware of is reverse culture shock is a very real thing. I find at least it can catch up on you because you don't think you have to adjust back to being to what you know. But that, at least for me, that still definitely was the case.
yeah. And this was a very fractious kind of time to come back to this country politically. And even though I'm living out, alone in the woods somewhere, I do notice a definite different feeling than even when I left, which Yeah, and I'm just trying not to succumb, right? Not to fall into this pit of mistrust and sort of fear that seems to be, sorry if I'm saying something quasi-political, but it definitely has a different feeling than before, and I feel fortunate to have been having a different lens for the last several years for so many
Mm.
reasons. First of all, I'm thankful for so much over for my Bali years for sure. I wouldn't even know where to start. But yeah, the culture shock, absolutely.
My brain just got totally distracted because when you said as soon as you said "pit of," I immediately filled in with the word despair
Make of
because of The Princess
despair.
Bride.
Yeah,
The bit of despair. Like,
yeah.
if nobody knows the movie we're talking about, please go watch The Princess Bride before you continue listening to this podcast. Like, that is a requirement.
Right. It's funny, I promise.
It's so good. Oh, it's so good. I'm gonna refrain from just saying a lot of one-liners right now where half the people listening might not know what I'm talking about. Yes, exactly. We're clearly saying the word inconceivable in our heads. Anyway, with all of these moves, I feel like, we've talked a lot about the reality of the clay practice of relearning things, but is there something that, because I'm sure a lot of people also hear it and you can very quickly romanticize you know, going from the Virgin Islands to the south of France to Bali, like all of these are places that like our eyes light up with stars and hearts and
Yeah.
emoji faces. But do you feel like there's something, and maybe you already answered this and I'm being redundant because you've talked about kind of being light on your feet and not having a lot of physical items, but do you feel like there's something that people should understand about the reality of an international life up to this point, at least? I mean, I know you're talking about kind of putting down roots now, maybe, but
Well, I think one of the things, you do get to meet a ton of people and learn a ton about different approaches to anything, whether it's, art, ceramics, food, like anything. And it's really wonderful and eye opening. And it can get lonesome because it's not a very common way to live. And so people very quickly go on about their way. If you're sort of transient or if you are even living in one of these locations, like with Bali, I was working full time and I met so many amazing people, the students, the residents, the interns, the instructors. It was incredible, but they all leave. And
Mm.
and sometimes you feel like, oh, there was this great connection and you think, oh, if only this person would stay and, my community or have a friend who also knows ceramics and how great that would be. So sometimes, at least like in that situation, you're a perpetual host. And also, there's not the time or the intimacy, sort of that leisure that you have when you're somewhere long term and when you meet all these people where no one really quite understands what your life is like and you can't put it in a nutshell as much as I want to for you. It's different for everyone, and for me as somebody that was working full time, very full time, I didn't necessarily fit in the same mold as many of the other foreigners that were living there because many of them might have been working, digital nomads or maybe yoga instructors or things that were a little bit more flexible. So you can just sort of, I guess one thing you can expect is to perhaps just never quite feel like you fit in anywhere. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I've known that feeling from a very early age, having grown up, in a foreign country as a kind of a third culture kid. I mean, I belonged in my little social circle, but I was always used to being a little bit of an outsider. And I don't say that in a sense of it was lonely or, you know, I didn't make connections. It's just that we all have roles to play in social structures. And I think I found over time, since I kept insisting on traveling and I kept in just insisting on this freedom, that that's the role that I have, that I feel like I'm easily adaptable to new places and new studios and new materials and all of that. And what goes along with that is you don't always have, an inner circle that is with you physically. I have dear, dear friends that are very far away, but you just, yeah, I wouldn't know what it would be like to be, in a stable kind of community, like all my friends my own age are half of them could be grandparents now for all, and I don't even have
Okay,
kids,
well,
so
then I need to know your skincare routine because I wasn't guessing that at all.
Well, this is fluorescent lights in my kitchen.
Right? I mean, log cabins aren't known for their great lighting, so that just doubles
Oh.
down on the skincare apparently. But
Oh, well, no, it's actually
Bali humidity.
it's not a humidity here in Montana, very dry. No.
All right.
No, lots and lots of sun exposure and no sunscreen. That's what it is. This is all gonna fall off in about 5 years, very likely.
Just
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
I was just gonna try to wrap up. I don't mean to sound like all precious and weird about, this kind of a life of if you wanna be on the move and, I feel like I'm talking myself into a knot. It's great. It's fantastic. And also, people will put up roadblocks to that. Like the fact that I now have these dogs, I'm not gonna let it stop me. If it's important, I will find something for them and I will go on my trip and they will adapt and I will come back to them. It's all just a matter of what people are willing to give up and what they're willing to spend, right? Like, because it costs or what you can negotiate, for these things.
Well, and not even spend literally. Like, when I heard you say that, I didn't even think of financially, I just thought of more, your priorities. What's the kind of guiding principle that's going to set up what your life actually looks like, And if the through line I'm hearing from you, whether we were talking about changing mediums or art or moving, is this constant, insatiable curiosity. I had a coach once who had me do an exercise where, and people have probably heard of this before, like a values exercise where you have a sheet of a whole bunch of things and you have to pick five. But he took it a step further. And then it was like, okay, well, I think we picked 10 maybe. And he was like, between this one and that one, which one? You have to pick one. Which one? And we did this constantly to get to the one, thing. And
Yeah.
for me, it was autonomy.
Mm,
Autonomy was the one that I constantly would not give up, like
interesting.
over
Yeah.
everything, over, I don't know, healthcare is not a value, but you know what I mean? Like over everything, autonomy was the number one. And it was kind of like, okay, like that clarified things for me in a way that made so much sense when, business was uncertain and I was feeling like I had a chip on my shoulder about what my friends were doing with their careers or whatever. And yet every time a friend would be like, well, there's a job opening, you should apply. And I'd be like, I don't
Same.
know.
Yeah.
Right? I appreciate the both and because that's what I think that's part of the conversations I'm interested in here for the podcast is like, okay, on the surface, what you're seeing on Instagram looks one way, and that's still true, but there's more, you know?
Right. Right. I think at the end of the day, if you can just say, I wouldn't trade it, then that's success, even though it may not look like, success to someone else with different values, right? So if your guiding principle is autonomy, you can that's your gauge. Am I succeeding in this? And then you can go to the secondary principles that are important to you. But yeah, I just know it's just like the clay life, just like the artist life. It's not for everybody. And thank God, because then life is so interesting for us each to be walking our own little path and crossing paths here and there. It's great. Like even just staying all by myself in a cabin for 5 months has been freaking marvelous. I've loved it, even though I really like people. It's been great.
I think part of what I was so interested in, and I'm going to make sure I ask Rhiannon's question because I've just gone down my own curious rabbit hole this whole time, is that, when Rhiannon suggested that you and I chat and then kind of looking online at what you were up to, it was that a little bit of that knowing like so much of this can be romanticized. And so what does the pragmatism side of it all look like of like, how the heck you made clay, if you were still just painting, it would have made so much more sense to me.
Right. Or if I felt like I could squeeze myself into a job that was more than 1 semester long, I mean, I did in Bali, but it was also like ever changing. But, or yeah, exactly. Like God, but each of us is just so different. And some of us are just a little more stubborn than others about, you know, yeah, just stubborn about what it takes to be free or be happy or whatever.
I love
Okay.
that. Well,
So,
Rhiannon did so as I mentioned before we hit record, our community members know who I'm chatting with ahead of time and then have the opportunity to kind of scope people out and ask questions. And so she was I think we've talked a lot about kind of how your career has developed, but what Rhiannon specifically was wondering is if there was something that has been the most pivotal in your career path or what you think maybe has been the most pivotal in your career path.
oh,
Yeah, she's known for big questions.
yeah. I would say, I don't know if this is it, but this is what's coming to mind right now. And that is that when I did go back to school and I did my post back and I went to grad school, there was always this messaging that you should specialize and that you should identify the clay that you're going to work with, identify the firing method you're going to work with, stick to it, make work that's recognizable as yours, So it started to sound very much like creating a brand, even though this was fine art stuff, that you had to be very coherent in all of this. And I wanted to put painting aside, I was making sculptures at that time, but I also really wanted to make pots too. And for many years, I felt deficient, or I felt, do I just have an attention span problem? But I just didn't want to focus in on one idea. I could focus in on one idea for a while, but almost always I had to have simultaneously something else going on as a respite from that one idea. And then that always fed back to the big idea again. And I didn't understand. And then the more I looked around as I kind of went through the whole grad school thing, I realized there were lots of people doing that. But the messaging was that oh yeah, but you should be, and I guess they were trying to set us up for success and for being, kind of recognizable and viable as maybe a commercially successful artist. But I was much too stubborn. I did try a few times and I was much too stubborn until finally I just felt like it didn't matter anymore. It just didn't matter what they thought. And that was a big step for me. I was already 40 by the time I got my MFA. So I was like a grown adult who'd had a bunch of jobs and lived a life. But for it to be all the way up until then, before I finally trusted that it's okay to follow your curiosity, because who the heck are you doing this for anyway? Right? Just because you're putting your work out and you're making it available for shows or for sales or even for commissions, even that, like, you still should be, or I don't want to say should, but one hopes that you are ultimately doing this for your own expansion, your own delight, and your own expression. And each of us, there are as many paths as there are people, right? And it just took a long time for me to respect that as a viable path for me. Maybe not viable financially, like you're not going to get a gigantic loyal following on socials like this, but to follow your own integrity means that the people that do resonate, that your work resonates for them, that's your community. And, I think that was a huge pivot for me to just realize I can do what I want. And I'm not trying to please anybody or pass any tests or win popularity contests you know, or bang at a gate that people are gatekeeping. I'm just going to make what I want. I'll do what I want, pretty stubborn, really. But it took a long time to just give myself permission to not feel like a failure for that. And I don't feel like a failure whatsoever anymore. It doesn't matter if somebody wants to look and go, well, shoot, you don't even have a studio, girl. I don't care. I have a life that is creative and fulfilling to me, and I want it to become more so. But yeah, I think that's it, that you just do what you do to make yourself feel like you're fulfilling the things that excite you. You're following your own path. Yeah. Otherwise, I may as well just be in a job, I might as well just go be working for somebody else because, I'm not, for me anyway, and there's a place for everybody doing whatever they want, however they want. For me, I don't I'm not interested in making a product, even though I'm making things and I'm saying, "Do you like it? Do you want it?" I'm not thinking of them. They're not like products. To me, they're an artifact of this really cool experience I had making. And so I feel that I'm very rich in that if I can spend my days exploring some idea that I'm really curious about, and even if I get 15 duds, that one gem is worth the duds. Well, then great. Then that's what makes me happy. Who cares? And if somebody wants to buy it, then that's somebody, if they know what they're in for, then that's somebody who speaks my language. And that's somebody who is interested in untangling the layers and discovering kind of the story behind that piece. I can talk all day long. I am so sorry. That was a long one.
Why? I'm loving every moment of this. I actually had meant to ask you earlier about how you kind of this exact subject in terms of having multiple disciplines and having multiple mediums and having styles change, and because you're right, it does go against, and my traditional schooling with graphic design and brands was very much like everything you've just said. And so it's refreshing to figure out, like, there is a path to make something different than, and it's the thing hopefully people have heard me say a lot in terms of, like, you can do anything. You just then there's a cause and effect, right? So it's like if somebody's telling me they want, I don't know, 10,000 Instagram followers, well, then consistency matters. If that doesn't matter to you and curiosity is what matters the most, then you can find your people. And how many people do we really need? Like, I can't make pots for 10,000 people. So it's one of those, like, if you do this, then that. If, one, then A or whatever. It's not that straight of a line, but I loved the way that you connected all of that in terms of, like, you said it really beautifully, and I should have just, like, put a bow on it and stopped the conversation. And now I'm stumbling through, but it's one of those, there's a lot of best practices. People hear about a lot of things, but I think we can kind of cherry pick what those best practices are that actually work for us and our lives and what we define as what success looks like and what the lives that we want to have are.
For sure. I mean, we all know the idea of success is completely subjective. I mean, we have some dominant ideas of what that means, but each of us will have our own things that define success. And I'm not somebody who would really even talk in those terms regarding my own self, except for perhaps like, oh, a particular necklace or a particular mug or something like that is a moment of success, a moment that feels like, oh yeah, I didn't even know I was looking for this and here it is. And you can't you can put a dollar on a value on that and sell it, but that feeling is what is a feeling of being very much alive. So for me, it's like the counterpoint of hiking in a big mountain and just being like, oh, falling apart in awe of the beauty, say, here or anywhere. And then coming into the house and getting a different kind of falling apart in awe just about the endless possibilities of things one can make. Something that wasn't there a minute ago and it is there now. I mean, that's like the essence of life, right? Something wasn't there. I got an idea, you got an idea, and you made it. And it might be like a flippin' soap dish. But when you think about it, which I love to do a ton of thinking and musing when I work, to me, that is absolutely exciting. And someone else might be like, yeah, that's absolutely obvious, Eva, but I don't care. I get a kick out of the ideas of there's possibility and then you solidify it into this one thing. Well, now that thing's done. It's off the table. What next? What else can you make that's fresh and new? And so you make a lot of things that are goofy and dumb and nobody ever gets to see them. But every now and then you make something that feels like that wasn't just me. That was some kind of, maybe it's woo woo, some
Mm.
kind of collaborative, creative charge that was happening. And I think for some, that's why I'm here. That's part of why I'm here. And the other part might be that to live this weird life that is kind of different and to share, just to share that excitement that is not at all cynical, I think, again, I'm going off on a tangent, but There's absolutely nothing cynical about, I think, true creativity, and I feel like that's extremely important, even on the tiny scale of whether it's a mug and a cup or something grand. So anyway, I'm coming down off my soapbox now.
I think it's refreshing. I think I probably fall in the I don't know if I'm in the category of cynical, but I'm always in the like, wait, but how? Wait, but how does that work? But how does that work? And so I think for me at least, it's super refreshing to see somebody who for, many years now have just like I don't know if there's a innate trust that you have that things work out and have a way of working out. And so you just keep going but
Bingo.
also, that insatiable curiosity of you're just gonna keep making whatever it is that you're curious about, and that has worked for you, and you have lived a fascinating I mean, I'm sure we could just put us in a room together and the stories would just oh my gosh, we're gonna have to do this again. That much I can tell you.
Yeah, it's true, and the only thing I would sort of qualify all that with is the frustration of the starting and stopping. But there's a price, right? There's a price for everything, and I feel like I'm really hoping that I'm on the precipice of creating a situation that has a little bit of longevity and a little bit of stability so that I can finally, at my ripe old age, begin work in a consistent way and discover what that might be like. Right?
Mhm.
I've definitely done the starting and stopping, which ends up doing a lot of overlapping, like backing up, starting again. And that can start to feel routine as well, even though it's always changing and start to feel a little bit like humdrum. We've been here before.
Right, like, I wanna skip past this phase, let me get to the next one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, you cannot possibly be that old. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, do you want me to say my age?
No, 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 that's not what I'm just saying, I think you've got plenty of time to, like, get into this deep routine.
Girl, I'm old enough. But
We'll let everybody if they weren't listening clearly enough to figure out the math, they just have to go back and re-listen to this episode once again, figure it out.
anyway, my birthday's next month, so I'll probably announce my age next month. I like to do that. I like to not hide it. But I do want to say something about when you said something about trusting that everything's going to be
Mm,
okay. 100%. Everything is okay. Everything will be okay. Yeah, there's a lot of crap going on, but the thing is, it is if you are trusting, if you believe and know that one way or another, and often in surprising ways, things are okay, then they will be. I absolutely believe
mm.
that. And what a wide open way to approach things. It's not a way of like eliminating tons and tons of possibilities and focusing down to something that's risk free. It's being wide open to, whoa, who knows what's coming, but it's going to be exciting or it's going to be interesting and we'll roll with it when it gets here. And, that could be about art, that could be about life, that could be about anything, I suppose, a road trip, like whatever.
Bringing a cat and a dog from Bali to the United States.
Yeah. And yeah, those poor
Wild.
babies. They're fine. They're fine now. Yeah.
Snow's fun for the first winter.
Yeah, for the dog, yeah, the cat didn't leave the house for 5 months. I'm just now starting to get her to, like, go outside. We also now, like, the birds are coming back being spring, so she's starting to feel like, "Oh, her feet won't freeze if she goes out." Anyway,
There's
whatever.
things to explore out here now, so that's okay. Yeah. That's fair. I mean, I also don't wanna leave the house for 5 months in the middle of winter, to be fair, so
But that's how you get through crazy winteries, you have to get out in it.
which is why dogs are great because you have to go out with them to go for a walk, and so
Yeah.
I do. It just I actually like the snow. Let me back that up. I like the snow. It's when there's no snow and everything is gray and then the wind is terrible, then I'm like, "Why? Why am I doing this to myself? I could choose to live somewhere else."
It
But
is
here we
true
are.
to look out the window at that in your cozy cabin.
Right? Oh my gosh. One big final open-ended question. Is there something that I feel like you ended it so beautifully when in talking about trust and the way that that opens up the doors, but is there something that we haven't touched upon that you want people to know, wish we would have talked about?
Oh gosh. No, don't ask me that. I can talk all day long if you just like, leave the door cracked for me. So, okay, except for my Italy workshop, I would love to be able to let people know about that. Maybe we can put a
Heck
link
yeah.
because that's gonna be, like, a lot of this, but not just me talking and, like, not just one-on-one, but I have a ton of amazing things on the agenda for this workshop in Umbria, and it's just gonna be a great co-creation. I'm very excited about it, and I don't have to go into a bunch of detail on your time, but that's happening in October. So,
I was just gonna ask, number 1, when, and number 2, anybody who's listened to any episode prior should know that you mentioned Italy and clay, and I am happy to sit here and talk all day long.
right?
So,
Yeah.
October is like, oh my god, what a perfect time to be in Italy too. For anybody that doesn't know, that's when the olives get picked, obviously when the grapes get picked. Oh my gosh, prime time.
And we're gonna be making, like, amazing things and firing a wood kiln and yeah, and having these juicy conversations, you know?
I was like, do we need a translator for group trips? Because I know a guy and he
Oh,
knows a thing or two
yeah,
about
right?
clay, and then I can assist.
Yeah. Give me a call later.
Right? We're gonna make this happen. Well, where on the internet should we send people to check out what you're doing, check out about the workshops? You've got a lot of teaching stuff coming up, I feel like, so
Yeah. So at the moment, yeah, I haven't been very good about keeping all my stuff updated. I do have a website, which is my full name, evalisechampagne.com, but I'm about to, hopefully in the next month or two, just completely change it. So, like, if you go on there, it should have a sign just saying, like, work in progress, chaos, you know, don't go past this yellow tape kind of thing. But there's a ton of stuff on there, as I say, rather chaotic. Instagram, of course, is my full name, Eva Lee Champagne. And there is a link on my bio to my workshop. And I've already got like the day-to-day schedule kind of on there. And if anybody does have like any kinds of questions about that, I love to talk about it. I'm so excited. And, at Gaia, we were doing, 10 workshops a year. So I'm like ready to answer your questions. I'm very well trained in putting workshops together. So,
I was gonna say this is the longest you've gone without a workshop in a long
yeah,
time.
I know. I know. Yeah. And then in California, so I'm going to California in May. I'm going to be visiting San Jose City College for a day. I'll be visiting Mendocino College on May 5th. San Jose, I think, is May 1st. And then the weekend after that, I want to say it's Mother's Day weekend. I'm teaching a 2-day ceramic surface workshop in Monterey. And I think it's at Monterey Peninsula College, which is a wonderful ceramics program. Anybody's down that way. And then in early June, I'll be in Ketchum, Idaho, teaching a 3-day ceramic surface workshop at Boulder Mountain Clay Works as well. So beautiful Sun Valley, Idaho. Come on down. That's about it. Those are my plugs.
I selfishly want to like piggyback on all your workshops with photography, but mostly so you and I can just like road trip and hang out for a few weeks because I think it would just be so much fun.
Yeah, I drive a big car if you don't mind a dog in the back.
It wouldn't be a road trip without a dog in the back. Come on. Thank you so much for your time, Eva. I so appreciate it. I'll put a link to the website and Instagram in the show notes so people can come find you and hopefully come join you anywhere in the world.
We'll have so much fun. I can't wait. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. You're marvelous to talk to. You just make me talk nonstop. But I really, really appreciate it. So good to meet you face to face finally.
Eva's story has reminded me of something I am pretty darn confident is a universal truth when it comes to figuring out how the heck to make a living from the things you make. While technical proficiency is, of course, important, if for no other reason than the love and the respect that we have for this craft, when it comes to figuring out how to actually make all of this work, pragmatically speaking, adaptability is just as crucial of a skill. Think about it. It's fascinating how often we create our own roadblocks. We tell ourselves stories about why certain things won't or can't work. You can't make pottery because you don't own a kiln. Or you can't apply to that market because your studio space is small. You can't take good photos of your work because your studio's in the basement. And you can't possibly record a podcast or make an Instagram reel or put yourself on video because you hate the sound of your own voice. Spoiler on that last one, actually the last two, literally all of us hate the sound of our own voice. It's been scientifically studied, and I absolutely have photography students who work in their basements. But I digress. The point is, Eva's journey shows us many of these limitations exist primarily in our minds. Perhaps the real question isn't, why won't this work? But rather, how curious am I about finding a way to make it work? When we focus on following our curiosity rather than our fears, unexpected paths just might reveal themselves. What Eva's nomadic journey shows us is that there are many different ways to building a fulfilling creative life. And permanence is just one option, not a requirement. Our creative practices don't have to follow anyone else's timeline or presumed requirements. And if you've listened to even just a handful of episodes here on the podcast, then you already know that I am all about helping each of us figure out what version of making actually works for our specific, unique life circumstances and desires. Whether that's staying in one place for decades or, like Eva, following your curiosity across continents. If you're looking for support in figuring out your own unique path as a maker, and maybe even a small business owner, then remember there are over 100 other creative people from around the world having these very conversations inside of the community right now. These conversations might be happening casually during co-working hangouts that help make those solitary home studios feel less lonely, or it might be a conversation that's a little bit more structured and pragmatic, like talking about managing sales and pricing, or being prepared for tax time, or implementing SEO optimization on your own website or even your own Etsy listings, which is our current theme of conversation and the masterclass that I recently recorded inside of the community. So if you're looking for pragmatic education or moral support, both can be found at makersplaybook.com/community. Becoming a member also supports the creation of this very podcast. You can learn more about the additional perks and a list of the masterclasses we've already had and heaps of resources that are available and growing by visiting, once again, makersplaybook.com/community. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.